it's Sunny Boulay, and welcome back to Black American Lineage. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your likes and your comments. Thank you so much for your comments. Thank you for all you do to support this channel. And today, we're going to talk about a very interesting subject, and that is how Black Americans changed American politics. I believe that when Black people, the enslaved people, were brought here and indoctrinated into this system, I don't think that America, and I'm talking about white America, ever thought that they were going to grow out of that. I think they thought they had a permanent bottom caste workforce. But time and events and people change and circumstances change. And at a point, everything changed. So Black people have had to create a path step by step by step to get where we are now. And when we say we stand on the shoulders of giants, we stand on the shoulders of giants. So let's talk about how Black people, Black American people, have challenged U.S. presidents to deliver on America's promises. This article comes from USA Today, and it is an opinion piece by Stuart D. McLaurin, and he says Black people have challenged U.S. presidents to deliver on America's promises, and he's going to tell us how. Black History Month is a perfect time to reflect on the lasting contributions that so many Black Americans, famous and anonymous, have made to White House history. Black Americans helped raise its walls, and that's a cute way of saying that they built the White House to begin with. For centuries, they've done much of the work that makes the White House run, and in the face of arduous legal, social, and political barriers, a multitude of Black Americans, from influential visitors to White House staff and trusted advisors, have opened presidential minds, challenged our leaders to deliver on America's promises, and made history themselves. A free Black man, Benjamin Banneker, helped map the boundaries of America's new capital city and urged future President Thomas Jefferson to add Black Americans to his cause for liberty. For 8 years, more than 200 enslaved people were forced to quarry stone, cut timber, make bricks, and raise walls and roofs to help build the White House. Well, I want to ask a question. If they did all of that, who was there? Who else was doing anything else? We don't ever know who these other people were. When they say the Black people helped, but we don't ever know who the other people were. So we're going to just say that the Black people built the White House just to keep it clean. Free Blacks and enslaved people played a role at the White House. In the decades that followed the building of the White House, free and enslaved Black people were key to the functioning of the White House as it rose to a center of national power. They cleaned the residences, cooked meals, tended horses, sewed, mended, and washed clothes. They were trusted with the most personal of services, like helping presidents and first ladies with dressing and grooming, nursing White House children, greeting guests, and waiting on first families as they ate. So it seems like they were basically living these people's lives, doesn't it? How early presidents failed enslaved people. Yeah, and that's an understatement. During the War of 1812, as the British approached to burn the White House, we know that the British burned the White House during the War of 1812. An enslaved man named Paul Jennings helped move George Washington's portrait to safety. I should have let him burn it up. Jennings later helped 77 people in a daring escape that fueled the growing anti-slavery movement in the United States. So the enslaved people were doing what was right in spite of the situation that they were in. Black Americans influenced events during the Civil War. Frederick Douglass helped move President Abraham Lincoln from general opposition to slavery to working to abolish it. He used a White House visit to press Lincoln to pay black soldiers equal wages and retaliate against Confederate executions of black prisoners. Elizabeth Hobbs Keckley, who earned money as a seamstress to buy her freedom, became a dressmaker for First Lady Mary Lincoln and tended the Lincoln's dying son, Willie. She created a charity to support refugee camps of newly freed people in Washington, D.C., and persuaded the Lincolns to support the cause. The influence of black people on culture and policy. By the middle of the 19th century, black Americans were carving out an important place on White House's cultural stage. The Fisk Jubilee Singers, who shunned traditional minstrels to introduce the spiritual as an American art form, are believed to be the first black choir to perform at the White House. I would love to challenge this person to produce the first white choir that sang at the White House. I guarantee you he couldn't find it. Black soprano Marie Salika Williams acclaimed green room performance for President Rutherford Hayes in 1878 inaugurated a tradition of musicals that continues today. But access and influence on policy matters came more slowly for black Americans. In 1901, Theodore Roosevelt invited the black educator Booker T. Washington, who advised the president on race relations, to dine with him at the White House, a historic first that triggered scathing editorials. William Monroe Trotter, who founded a newspaper that fought racial discrimination, confronted President Woodrow Wilson in a White House meeting over his decision to allow the racial segregation of government clerks to no avail. I didn't get that. What he's saying here is that Theodore Roosevelt invited Booker T. Washington to have dinner at the White House, and that was such a scandal that the newspapers just basically crucified Roosevelt for inviting a Negro to dine at the White House. And then William Monroe Trotter, who advocated for civil rights, tried to get Woodrow Wilson, the next president, to desegregate the White House staff and let them dine together, and he wouldn't do it. Woodrow Wilson was, and everybody agrees, was a racist. Black women also played a role in the gradual opening of White House doors when First Lady Lou Hoover included the wife of black Congressman Oscar DePriest on the guest list for a White House tea in the late 1920s. A controversy ensued. Mrs. DePriest was able to break ground by attending a separate gathering Mrs. Hoover hosted with more open-minded wives. So see, they didn't want black people coming up in the White House in the 1920s or the 2020s for that matter. In 1939, after the Daughters of the American Revolution refused to let Marian Anderson sing at Constitution Hall because she was black, First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt was angered enough to resign from the organization. Marian Anderson did perform at the White House at Mrs. Roosevelt's invitation. Also, as a result of this, Marian Anderson performed at the Lincoln Memorial on April the 9th of 1939, which was Easter Sunday, and it brought in a crowd of over 75,000 people. So you see, you can't hold us back. Civil rights movement brings changes to the White House. As the civil rights movement became a national force in the 1960s, White House doors finally began to open more often. Martin Luther King Jr. and other black leaders such as Roy Wilkins and A. Philip Randolph began visiting the Oval Office to advise, strategize, and put pressure on Presidents John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson to move forward. When iconic civil rights laws were finally passed, black leaders were part of the White House signing ceremonies. The second half of the 20th century also saw black people breaking into the ranks of senior White House staff and other executive leadership roles. President Dwight Eisenhower made E. Frederick Morrow the first black person to serve in an executive presidential staff position, though he was generally disappointed with the administration's civil rights policies, and I'm sure he was. Clifford Alexander, a deputy special counsel to Johnson, went on to become the first black secretary of the Army. Robert J. Brown developed minority enterprise and black college programs for President Richard Nixon. Togo West also served as Secretary of the Army under President Bill Clinton, who later appointed him to be the first black Secretary of Veterans Affairs. In the decades that followed the Civil Rights Movement, the influence of black advisors reached the highest levels of the White House. Former National Urban League head Vernon Jordan became a close confidant to President Clinton. Colin Powell served Presidents Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush as the first black national security advisor and Secretary of State. In 2001, Condoleezza Rice was appointed National Security Advisor by President Bush, then succeeded Powell as Secretary of State. The Obamas make history. The White House has also served as a stage where black Americans who have made history are honored with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Path breakers like Marian Anderson, as well as Duke Ellington, Jesse Owens, Andrew Young, Jackie Robinson, Ella Fitzgerald, Arthur Ashe, Bayard Rustin, Rosa Parks, Hank Aaron, Maya Angelou, Alvin Ailey, Fred Gray, Toni Morrison, Diane Nash, and many others have won the Presidential Medal of Freedom. That was a long list. For every famous name, there are many more unknown stories of black achievement and contributions to White House history, including staffers like Lillian Rogers, Alonzo Fields, Preston Bruce, and Eugene Allen, and a pair of path-breaking White House correspondents, Alice Dunnigan and Ethel Payne, after whom the White House Press Room Lectern is named after. In 2009, a black president and black first lady entered the White House, a milestone day that some feared would never come. The Obamas were conscious of the centuries of black history that preceded them. Well, and they should be. The struggles of Rosa Parks and Coretta Scott King were more familiar to me than those of Eleanor Roosevelt or Mamie Eisenhower, Michelle Obama later wrote in her autobiography. I carried their histories along with those of my mother and grandmothers. And yes, and that would make sense. The White House Historical Association works to keep these memories alive by funding the White House acquisition of works by black artists and placing markers in Lafayette Park to tell the story of those enslaved workers. Similar recognition would strengthen the stories told by the White House itself, as well as pre-White House presidential residences in New York and Philadelphia where enslaved people labored. Like the hardships and injustices that black people have faced, black achievement has been foundational to the American story. You better believe it. The progress we have made and the challenges remaining are just as central to White House history. And that is a fact. And this is the first time anybody has ever told it in this kind of comprehensive way. But this is a really good article which just talks about the history of black people in the White House. That's just one place in America. We are everywhere and always have been. So this is a picture of the author, Stuart D. McLaurin, president of the White House Historical Association. And he did a very good job. I must give it to him. He did a good job. Okay, y'all, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this article. And as always, have a great day.